Coach Robb podcast, answering questions and eliminating frustrations about health, wellness, and performance since 1987.
Welcome to the Coach Robb podcast, number 63. Coach Robb Beams, how are we doing today?
Hey, good afternoon, man. I can't thank you enough. I know I say at the beginning of every show, but I really appreciate you cutting me in here. I know you've not been feeling the best the last couple of weeks. I'm glad to see you've got your color back and not running a fever. So thank you on behalf of myself and all of our subscribers. Thank you very much, man. It's good to see you.
It's been a rough couple weeks, but I'll tell you, you know how big of an advocate I am for the energy fuel. The energy fuel kept me alive for the last 2 weeks. I don't know what I got, Coach Robb, but I was so sick and dehydrated and sweating. The energy fuel saved my life. So, folks, get yourself some energy fuel.
Well, I hope people don't see that as being a selfless plug. I'm just glad that you have confidence in the product. Like I said to you, we've got over 5 years of beta testing in it, and we're very confident in what it'll do. And I hope everybody will give it a shot. We add extra electrolytes because that's what you're losing in the form of sweat. And the hardest part when it comes to drinks like that, especially when you're depleted, is your brain becomes foggy, and people don't realize that their liver feeds their brain, and that liver lives off of sugar. So I'm glad that it worked for you, and we'll definitely keep you stocked up. But it's glad to have you back, and I'm glad Sabrina's feeling better as well.
Thank you. You guys, make sure you guys like and subscribe to the YouTube channel here. It definitely helps us out. Make sure you leave us a comment. Tell us how we're doing down below, and we'll have some fun with this one. Coach Robb, we had a lot of fun with the last podcast that we did. We weren't as serious. We joked around a little bit, kind of brought it back home, and the viewers and listeners loved what we did there. But we're going to get a little bit more serious today. We'll try to have some fun with it like we always do. But we're going to talk about guaranteed weight loss for health and performance today.
Absolutely. And before we get too deep into this, moms and dads that feel like you've kind of got that parent bod going on, we're going to clarify why that's happening. And more importantly, we're going to talk about what you can do to reverse the situation that you're in. But I will start today's conversation by saying it's going to go 100% against the grain of what you're going to find on the internet. Now, as a full, I don't know how to say it. Is it transparency? I hate when someone says, to be honest. Well, if you have to say you're being honest, then are you really being honest? At any rate, that's just a pet peeve of mine. But yeah, the bottom line is I didn't create nutrition. I didn't create physiology. But I also hope everybody understands, if you followed us for any period of time, I'm not into propaganda. I'm not into, hey, I'll give you the trick just around the corner for just $19.99. That's not the way I like to work. I want people to understand the truth behind the physiology and the nutrition. Now, we're going to talk a lot about this today. There are situations that are what we call textbook or clinical type of scenarios. Like when we look at high intensity interval training, you'll have people that will tell you, hey, you got to go to the gym and you got to smash yourself. And we're going to kind of poke some holes into why that theory doesn't work. Again, if you've been with us for any period of time, I'm going to go down the path of stress. I don't think anybody who's, if you're wearing the Garmin and you're seeing your stress scores above 25, that's a problem. If for those of you that love the world of motors, if your motor's under a lot of stress, would you just say, suck it up, buttercup, right? You give the dashboard the snub of the nose and you just keep driving. And then when it grenades itself, you go, I guess I should have paid attention to those symptoms. I should have paid attention to the dashboard. Well, same thing's going to apply here. What I do want everybody, regardless of your age, regardless of how many children you've had, no matter what you've been through personally or professionally, divorce, bankruptcy, new jobs, all of it, I get it. 100% I get it. The good news is, if you can stick to these principles, it is going to take a little bit longer than you're probably going to desire, but go into it with an open mind. I'll even go so far as to say it's guaranteed. It is absolutely guaranteed, not because I'm smart, but because I didn't create the principles of what we're going to talk about today.
Let's get into it. We talk about weight loss, right? We all get infatuated with the scale. And when we get on it and we see it go up, we usually freak out. When we see it go down, we're usually excited and pumped. But there is a method to the madness with the fluctuation of your weight. And I want to talk a little bit about your morning weight versus your afternoon or evening weight and what that actually means.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I know, especially for females, that scale can have just a tremendous love-hate relationship. And I'm hoping that you will be open-minded to the scale. Don't get hung up on what the number is. And we're going to elaborate. I'm not trying to be naive. I'm not trying to, just turn a blind eye to it. The scale is being used incorrectly. And when you talk about that AM and the PM weight, for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, grab a piece of paper. If you're driving, commit this to memory. And when you get someplace that you can jot it down, please do so. We want your morning weight to be consistent. We want your evening weight to be consistent. And we want your evening weight to be 3 to 5 pounds heavier every single night. Now, again, I know some people are going to say, this guy's a jerk. This guy's an idiot. I know I'm getting that negative canary on your shoulder kind of stirred up, because you look at that scale and you go, man, I'm up 3, 4, 5 pounds. That's fantastic news. What that tells us, and again, Dan, keep me online here, so I want to make sure our listeners totally get this concept. When you look at your morning body weight day after day after day after day, when you compare morning weight to morning weight, that shows you inflammation and swelling from either exercise or a reaction to food. Keep that in mind, and we'll come back to it here in just a moment. When we look at your body weight morning to evening, that's how we validate you're properly hydrated. Remember, I said at the beginning of this conversation today, the mainstream, I hate to use the word diet, golly, it's the bane of my existence. When you look at diet, right, they're always promoting that you're going to lose X amount of pounds in the first week. I'm going to share my screen. If you guys are following us on YouTube, I want to share a screen with you. So please take a moment and take a look at this graph. Okay. So what this graph is showing you is if you eat a carbohydrate. Now, if you look at this illustration, I'm referring to complex carbohydrates because fruits and vegetables in their raw form is a complex carbohydrate. You could also substitute high quality grains, breads. The idea here is when you eat an edible carbohydrate and that gets converted to stored energy, no fancy word here, glycogen. Glycogen is nothing more than stored sugar. But look at the illustration here. When your body is converting what you've eaten to stored energy, the glycogen is going to be stored in the liver, which feeds the brain, and the muscles, which feeds movement. Check out the water retention. Anywhere between 2.5 and 2.8 grams of water is going to be retained by the body. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, take a screenshot of this and put this in your phone, jot it down in a way that makes sense to you. Okay. Now, let's come back to the original piece that you and I were talking about, Dan. When we're looking at the idea that we want desirably to be up 3 to 5 pounds in the evening, so many people freak out and they go, well, how do I know that's not body fat? Well, that's a legitimate question. And again, Dan, neither you nor I are mocking anybody who has struggled with weight. Please understand, I'm not saying, oh, just blow it off, don't worry about it. No, that's not what I'm saying. Get a little bit more insight into what the numbers are reflecting. If you go to Google will tell you that a pound of fat is approximately made up of 3,500 calories. So if you see the scale 2 pounds heavier at night, before you freak out, ask yourself, did I eat 7,000 surplus calories during the day? I mean, Dan, on the show here today, or previously, we've talked about how hard it is to get enough good, clean calories. And if you look at the idea that we recommend to all of our listeners, eat fruits and vegetables with lean protein. When we're looking at the idea that your scale should be up 3 to 5 pounds, that just means that you're hydrated. And you go, why are we so worried about hydration? To reduce the stress on the system. Now, we're going to go down a deep dive here for about 2 minutes, but please don't check out on all the technical elements associated with nutrition because it's not technical. People make it technical, but it's not. When you eat fruits and vegetables, they're naturally high in water. So that's going to cause the body to become prehydrated. But the meaty part that you eat, Dan, like when you chew on a piece of apple, when you chew on asparagus, broccoli, whatever it may be, think about that as meat. I apologize for the vegans, the strict vegans, but just picture when you're chewing, right? That fiber has water in it. And when you eat that carbohydrate, because you're chewing on the meat of the fruit and the vegetable, well, as it converts that to stored sugar, you stack on more water. See how you prehydrate the body by eating fruits and vegetables? So you've got 2 wins on the hydration side. Well, let's get a little bit deeper. What do we always hear fruits and vegetables are high in? Vitamins and minerals. Again, it's going to go a little sciencey, but stay with me here. What's the catalyst for energy? Vitamins and minerals. And I've used this illustration in our show before, Dan. If you and I go camping and you pull over a big old log and I pull out a match and I'm sitting there putting it against the log and you're going to look at me like I drank my breakfast, right? You're like, you're an idiot, dude. You're not going to get that. That's what fruits and vegetables are. They're the kindling that makes your macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat generate energy. That's why I'm so adamant. Please do not strip a food group out of your diet unless you've been validated that you have a very, very health restricting reaction to it. People who have celiac disease, that's no game. People who are truly legitimately lactose intolerant, that's no game. I'm not minimizing that. But when you hear somebody say, don't eat something because of this, well, okay, that's like saying you're going to build a house, but just bring insufficient amount of materials, but we'll still figure out how to build a house. Yeah, we might get it built, but the slightest little windstorm comes and it falls over. Why? Because there's no foundation, there's no infrastructure. So step back and look at fruits and vegetables. High in water naturally. It's a complex carbohydrate, which causes you to retain water, win-win. Now you've got vitamins and minerals that are catalysts for energy. And if you look at your immune system, it's predicated off your ability to absorb vitamins, minerals, and macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat. See how easy this is?
So one of my questions is for, like the morning weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once you have your system down, right? Where you're consuming the liquid, the water that you should be consuming, which is half your body weight in ounces.
Yep.
You're eating your fruits and vegetables. You're not overeating your calories, right? If you look on your Garmin dashboard and you burn 4,000 calories a day and you've ate 4,000 calories a day, right? It's a net zero, right? So you're not gaining body fat from your calories.
Mm-hmm.
When you start looking at your morning weight and you start looking at your inflammation, right? If you compare morning over morning, could you potentially figure out if you were allergic to something that you're eating based on that morning weight? Say, you have an orange, in the afternoons, or a couple oranges or whatever, right? And you continue seeing like this inflammation in your body weight in the morning. Could you potentially dial it back to saying, hey, you know what, maybe I'm allergic to oranges or whatever you're eating?
100%. And if you have followed us for any period of time, I'm a big fan of MyFitnessPal, the app. It's if you go to the app store, it's just MyFitnessPal by Under Armour. And what it allows you to do is literally get a report that emulates exactly what you were just articulating. My calorie burn rate, I go into Garmin, I go to the calories in and out, or I can go to the reports and go to calories, and I can see what my calorie burn rate is resting and active. You called it 4,000 calories, there it is. You use MyFitnessPal, this is what I ate for breakfast, snack 1, lunch, snack 2, dinner, snack 3. Well, what's the calorie gap? Now you bring up a very important point. Let's just say that, and you have to almost be negative before you can go positive, right? So if we look at the idea that the body weight in the morning is up, we want to know, is that exercise related or food related? But you bring up a good point. If you went out and you did intervals yesterday, sure, you could say that inflammation in the morning is from exercise. That makes sense. If we go the other direction, let's say that you did a very easy bicycle ride, you swam, something that would have no reason for your body to get loaded up with inflammation and swelling. That's when we go and we look at the food. So when people say to me, how do we isolate food sensitivities? You make all the exercise aerobic, and we do that with heart rate monitors. So you kind of put a glass ceiling, you put a governor on. Then what we do is we look at the food that you're taking in and compare it against your morning body weight. So what you've done is you've removed the concern of exercise, and now you've isolated food. Now, if you eat pretty much the same thing every day, and we do this quite often when we're trying to find food sensitivities. If you eat the same breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I know it's boring, but if you're having a negative reaction and a lot of inflammation, GI distress, and all that goes with it, what will happen there is you'll be miserable enough that you'll be willing to micromanage and analyze your food intake. So now what that allows us to be able to do is say, okay, we're in a situation where I ate this, and I worked out this exact way from morning to noon, what I ate, excuse me, sunrise to sunset, what I ate, what I did exercise wise. Look at your body weight morning over morning over morning. How's your body weight look? So now if we see an anomaly, all of a sudden you bounce up, we have to go start isolating foods one by one. Not always an easy thing to do, but it's just a matter of documentation. The beautiful part is the Garmin is getting us our activity duration, average heart rate, max heart rate, and even is even telling us what our calorie burn rate is. The MyFitnessPal, you're putting it in, because I'll get people who say, well, how do I know if it's accurate? Because you're putting it in. So when you start to reverse engineer what that morning number is telling you, and again, please don't get into the number saying, oh, it's telling me I'm fat. Because if you're going to use the fat, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, if you're going to say that you're up 2 pounds is because you've gained 2 pounds of body fat, look at the calorie intake. Was it 7,000? Because there's that magical number. Or I hate to say it, but what if the scale says you lost 2 pounds, Dan? Did you really burn an extra 7,000 calories today? That's a boatload of exercise. So if you follow me for any period of time, you know I'm not a calorie counter. I think it can just become analysis paralysis. Most of our listeners are pretty busy as it is, much less to start counting 11 almonds and 13 raisins and this and that and the next thing. So what we say is just start putting your food into your MyFitnessPal, see how your body responds to it. So if you eat something that passes the textbook test, you used an orange, let's stick with that example. You eat an orange, yep, high in vitamins, high in water, it's got all the benefits, but your face explodes, literally you have an inflammatory response to it. Unfortunately, the orange doesn't pass your litmus test. That's where you just literally checks and balances. But that's where I don't want people getting hung up on the scale. It's completely unplausible to think that you're going to gain 2 pounds of body fat overnight. That's where we got to get that little negative canary off our shoulders.
I want to get more into the diet portion, right? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that people think that they need to, and maybe it is, Coach. Maybe it is. I think it is for me personally, because I tend to overeat, right, or eat the wrong things. So I want to get more into the diet, because I think that really affects people's weight loss and performance, obviously. One question I do have, because I want to get into like your blood sugar and how to stabilize that, and how much you should eat and how often. I want to get into all that, but
Okay.
One of my questions is, there is some people that do watch the calories that they eat, right?
Mhm.
And if you're running the Garmin dashboard and you know that your daily burn rate is 4,000 calories, say, right?
Yeah.
But you're only eating 2,500 calories. Is that okay? Is that a good thing? Or is your body telling you that you need 4,000 calories? I guess my question is it good to have a negative amount of calories based on your burn rate? And would that make sense in like burning fat and losing weight?
This is literally the $1 million question. And I even threw the caveat that we're going to go against the grain 100%. And for that is probably the number one reason. There's this ideology out there. And again, remember I said to you that there's things that we can put in a clinical setting and you can put it in, it'll pass the test, right? If you run 500 calories deficit every day, you're going to burn body fat. Not true, grasshopper. And the reason being, there's a couple facets to it, but I want to stick to your first question. I'm going to go a little bit geeky on the science, and then we're going to come back to make sure that our listeners 100% comprehend this. When you're looking at cutting let's just use the magical number of 500 calories, you've got to recognize, what does that do to the stress of the system? Now, I always go back to using the illustration of a young child, 6-month-old baby. If you know that you need to feed him or her 5 times, and let's just say you quantify that into ounces, and you just decide that you're going to cut 1 bottle out, how does the child react to it? They're going to become fussy. Why are they fussy? Because the hierarchy of needs, the idea of satisfying hunger, is always going to be the number one priority. It's really not true. Your number one, as a human being, your number one goal is not to die of either freezing to death or a heat stroke. So I don't want to contradict myself. That's always the number one focus. That's why we lose appendages when we get into cold environments, because the body has no problem losing fingertips because it's keeping all the blood centralized around the heart. That's how that works. If we go beyond that first hierarchy of needs, the second is to satisfy hunger. So now all of a sudden you're telling somebody, hey, go ahead and cut 500 calories out of your diet, be caloric restricted. Well, I don't know about you, Dan, but I've got 3 children, run my own business. I like to work out. We've got some parents that are getting a little bit older, right? We all have stress in our system that we're dealing with. So let me get this straight. You're going to encourage somebody whose stress levels are high to go ahead and add more stress to an already stressed out system, and then expect that because they're cutting calories, they're going to be able to lay down and go to sleep at night. Stop and think about that conception. I have a couple of graphs. I want to go into a little bit of a geeky science, because for those of you that are visual, I want you to see something. But Dan, you bring up probably the most volatile subject. If I'm going to get somebody to burn body fat, the number one thing I do is decrease the overall stress on the system. So for those of you that run a Garmin platform, go to your Garmin on your phone, go down to the 7-day averages and look at your stress score. You want that to be below 25 on average. Dan, if you go ride your motorcycle, if you go ride your mountain bike, your stress level is going to be higher because you stress the system. That's normal. Remember what we said earlier. We always want to be able to justify whatever the number is. If the body weight is up, is that a reaction to food, or is that a reaction to exercise? If the body weight is down, is that dehydration? See, that's where we want to be able to compare morning to evening, morning to morning. For those of you that are taking notes, please look at your piece of paper. Your morning weight against your evening weight is hydration. Your morning weight to morning weight is inflammation and swelling. Very simple. Don't make it any more complicated than that. When you're looking at trying to see if your body composition is changing, i.e. you're dropping body fat and building lean muscle mass, you use calipers and tape measures. So if you're watching this on YouTube, go into the description box below and click on the resources, and right there you can download our body measurement spreadsheet. What we want to look for is muscle symmetry, so that your left quad is the same as the right. That's from the performance standpoint. So we have muscle symmetry. But we also want to make sure that you can see areas because you know where you carry your body fat. So if you're let's say that you're trying to tighten up your abdominals and you're trying to get stronger legs. Well, as you build that muscle, you might see the circumference of the area getting bigger. But when you take the calipers and you pinch it, you have less adipose tissue. See how we put those two together? Keep it very simple. We're not worried about what the scale says. We care about what the calipers and the tape measures are telling us. Big difference. But now let's go back to your question about calorie restricted. If I can get somebody's stress to be under 25, then what we do is we move into the realm of exercise, because you're talking about diet. I want to take diet and bounce it off of exercise for losing body fat in a guaranteed way. Let me share my screen real quick. This is what we refer to as the energy matrix. And I want everybody that's on YouTube, please stop what you're doing and pay attention to the screen. What this is essentially showing you is as you bring the intensity level up, you're burning a higher percentage of sugar. See how this slopes upward? As you bring the intensity up, more and more sugar is being burnt. But look at what is being burnt less and less: stored body fat. Now, again, for those of you that are involved with high intensity interval training, the acronym nowadays is known as HIIT training. They will sell you on the idea that if you jack the heart rate up and you do all this training, it will eventually convert and burn more stored body fat. In a clinical setting, 100% textbook test, they're 100% correct. But I go back to, if you're running on 4 hours of sleep, if you just put your parents into a nursing home, if you just found out your dog has cancer, you find out you're going to lose your job, do you really think your body wants HIIT training? Go back to stress. Do you see the difference, Dan? Now, if I've got somebody who has their stress levels under 25 and they're able to eat and sleep enough, we only do interval training twice a week, and even that is kept to a minimum. And then we get into work rest ratios and all kinds of science that's beyond the scope of today's webinar together, podcast. So look at this graph very closely. As you bring your heart rate up, you burn more stored sugar. It's known as glycogen. We talked about that earlier. You're burning progressively less body fat. And this is why I get so frustrated with these so-called trainers, that somebody who is extremely overweight Their body's under a lot of stress because they're carrying a lot of adipose tissue, which means their core temperature is high, more stress. They're carrying more weight on their bones, more stress. We're not picking on you. You got to respect it. Now we're going to take this completely a different discussion. Excuse me. We're going to take the discussion a completely different direction. I'm going to share my screen again, but instead of looking at food and looking at intensity, let's take a look at sleep. For those of you that have a Garmin, this is on your Garmin dashboard. This is just your sleep from last night. And what I want you to pay attention to is what we call the sleep ratio between deep sleep and awake time. Deep sleep and awake time. You want your deep sleep number to be close to 2 hours. We want your awake time to be as close to 15 minutes or less. And we'd like your total sleep to be at least 8, preferably 9 hours. Now, this is obviously just a one-day snapshot. The idea here is, now, Dan, this is what becomes so important. Remember how you said earlier, hey, let's be in a 500 calorie deficit? If the body doesn't like to be hungry, it gets stressed. When the body is in a high level of stress, don't be surprised that your sleep quality is going to be negatively impacted, because we go back to hierarchy of needs. You want to go to sleep, your body wants to satisfy hunger. If you've listened to us for any period of time, protein and fat are the only macronutrients that will satisfy hunger. So now we kind of bring the whole nutrition into stress, tied in with body fat, tied in with exercise intensity and duration. And this is where I get so much pushback. I will have people that will come to me. It doesn't matter what vertical. We have our motorsports division, we have an endurance division, we have a ball and stick division, and we have a weight loss division. It's the exact same formula for everybody. Some are getting paid millions of dollars. It's a performance related issue. Some have just been told, if you don't lose 20 pounds, you probably aren't going to see your child's next birthday. Everybody's got their different spectrums on where they're at. What we want our listeners to understand is, number one goal, reduce stress. So Dan, if anybody has stuck with us this far, first and foremost, thank you. Go back to your evening weight. If you're dehydrated, your body's excessively stressed. Go back and listen to our previous pods that we've done together. When the body is under a lot of stress, the body produces a stress hormone known as cortisol, and that causes your percentage of body fat to go up. This is why people who are on a calorically restricted diet, exercising either for high volume and or high intensity, actually increase their body fat percentages. Because of this portfolio, it all has to be in sync. You can't be stressed to the gills, doing high intensity interval training, dehydrated, and cutting calories. You will only make yourself sick and get actually to a point of disease. And when I say diseased purposely, that means you have Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue, Addison's disease. Because think about it, the system's excessively stressed at work, at home, at the gym, and now you're going to starve it. It's unfortunately, this is why the weight loss industry is literally a multi-billion-dollar industry, because it's designed to fail. It's designed to set you up for failure. Dan, if you don't mind, I'd like to explain a concept known as the yo-yo diet. Have you heard of that before? Have you heard someone say, hey, you're on a yo-yo diet?
I have not.
Okay. So if you've got a piece of paper and you're watching with us live here on YouTube, on your piece of paper, just write 175. And then you go on this starvation diet, let's say for a month, and you go from 175 and you go down to 170. Pause the phone. What do we just spend the first 15 minutes talking about? When you eat a carbohydrate, you retain 2.5 to 2.8 grams of water. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
So now if I have you cut out all carbohydrates, and or I have you essentially starving yourself, so you're eating less and less food, which means through your natural food intake, you should naturally be hydrating, you're going to see the scale go down to 170. You're walking around with a chronic headache. You're like, my gosh, this is miserable, because you're dehydrated. You're not able to sleep at night because you're hungry. You haven't satisfied hunger. You're working out because your trainer said you got to go guts to the wall. So now you're miserable at the gym. Do you see how this is a Molotov cocktail?
Well, they're selling you a false bag of goods. I mean, in a sense, because you achieve what you're looking for, right? That 5 pounds of weight loss or whatever it is, you achieve it. So, they're right that you lost the weight, but you did it in such an unhealthy manner, and you've put your body in such stress that it's actually worse than you were before you started,
And
even though you've lost the weight.
that's where we look at the word sustainability. And this is where the weight loss industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I get you to go from 175 down to 170. Well, if you look at your notes, all you are is dehydrated, exhausted, and overstressed. But whether it's a trainer or a trainer in a diet plan, I hate that word. I even hate the word trainer nowadays. It's so adulterated. The idea here is they bring you in and they say, look, you've got to cut calories, and we're going to go guts to the wall. At the same time, underneath the hood, your adrenal system is overworking. So now you're producing cortisol, very, very stressful on the body, creates deep wrinkles, causes brittle skin, causes you to lose your sex drive, causes you to crave simple sugars, causes night sweats, causes you to be exhausted and not able to sleep. That's what overtraining will do. I don't even like to use the word overtraining. I like to call it overstressing. Work, family, relationships, finances, blah, 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 blah. You see why I get so adamant, but that's why I appreciate you taking time and joining me on putting the shows together. And I really appreciate all the subscribers who listen. You've got to break through the quagmire of misinformation. HIIT training works in a clinical environment. I myself was fortunate enough to go to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. They would not let us do a VO2 max test if we were exhausted. For those of you that like motors, right? It's like dynoing a motor that's got 100 hours on it. Why would you do it? You're just validating that you have a tired motor. Instead of it putting out 55 horsepower, are you really surprised it says it's at 49? It already has 100 hours on it. So if you put that into full context, why do we want to stress a system that's already stressed? The way that I have been successful in our weight loss division, as well as our high level performance, reduce stress, hydrate, nutrition, increase sleep, and adjust intensity with training. Because I want to come back to this real quick. When we go, for those of you that are with us here on Facebook, or excuse me, Facebook, gosh, here on YouTube, when you're going to go train and you're telling me that you want to drop body fat, if you use this energy matrix, if you want to burn more body fat, where should your heart rate intensity be? On the low end. If you're telling me that you want to work on top end sprint speed, yes, we got to get over here. But this is where we start to run into the limitation of the body can only store about 60 to 80 minutes of stored energy. So if you're doing something that's longer than an hour, you're going to have to start looking at a sports drink like energy fuel, because you've depleted your gas tanks, both in your liver and your muscles. So when you look at eating food, you're essentially topping off gas tanks. That'll give you about 60 to 80 minutes worth of exercise based on intensity. You guys have probably heard this a million times. We have enough, the typical individual has enough body fat to run a couple marathons back to back. So my argument is, why hasn't somebody done it? I want to see somebody go run 52 miles, not taking in any carbohydrates. Can't do it, because the body's gas tanks are eventually going to run out. Again, I'm bouncing around here on purpose because this is kind of just a synopsis of the misinformation. Hey, we have enough stored body fat to go do 2 marathons. We'll go run it.
Yeah.
If you really want to get highly technical, fat actually burns more efficiently in the presence of carbohydrates. People don't understand that. So when someone says strip a food group out, now you're losing vitamins, minerals, catalysts for energy, necessary elements to support the immune system. Now you've got the perfect storm. You're hungry, you can't sleep, stress levels through the roof, exercise is at a high intensity, and then you wonder why your immune system gets suppressed and you get sick all the time. Now we start a cascade of problems. Dan, you've been sick for a couple of weeks. How eager were you to get to the gym and go spin on the bike for 60 minutes?
I mean, I was pretty sick, so my eagerness was not very high when I wasn't feeling good. But you start kind of feeling better, right? You start kind of getting eager and antsy to get out and start doing things and get back to the gym. And but it's like it goes in stages. It really does.
But here's why I asked the question, and obviously we don't script our conversation. This is truly you and I bantering about a concept and an idea. When we look at the idea that when a human body, especially I always like to use a young child, like an infant. If you've ever raised a child or been around a small child, you can tell by their body's language. You can tell by their behavior, their temperament when they're tired and or hungry. So then you take an adult and you put them into a calorically restricted diet. They're not cordial to be around. They're snappy, short-tempered. And then you want me to go take and tell them to go guts to the wall and do high intensity training. And then the people around them have to deal with the Tasmanian devil that we've created, all because of low blood sugar as your 3-year-old, 3-month-old. The behavior is exactly the same, but here's what I wanted to bring up on you being sick. Did you notice what your body required of you when you got sick? You better feed me and you better give me a chance to rest. Otherwise, I'll never overcome the virus. What is it that I talk about almost every podcast we do? At some point in the conversation, it comes around. You need to eat more and you need to sleep more. The definition for those of you that are on the performance side of the spectrum, the only way you're going to get leaner, faster, and stronger is not by doing weightlifting in your sport. It's about sleeping and eating enough so that you can absorb the volume of training that you've done. That's how you get leaner, stronger, and faster. Now, is there work to be done in the gym? Absolutely. Please don't take that out of context. The subject is, why am I exercising and cutting calories and gaining weight? Because of stress. And you've got people that will go on the internet. Hopefully we don't get people that get disrespectful, because I love it. I love an adult conversation with someone. If you want to leave a comment below, I'll engage with you. But please stay to the principles of the subject. If you're going to show me or source somebody's book that says, oh, I've been keto and I've been 10 years, I've run 100 marathons, I'm calling bullshit. Because in my office, I see probably 20 to 30 people a month who've tried keto and high intensity interval training with suppressed adrenals, hair falling out, not able to get an erection at 25 years old. So don't tell me what somebody's book said, because unfortunately, a lot of the books, just like food, anything that comes in a box, a bag, or a wrapper, right? A diet plan that says, hey, buy all these meals and we'll get you lean. Bullshit. Go to your grocery store, eat fruits, eat vegetables, eat any meat product that you find that, if you're a strict vegan, you're going to have to do the combination of the legumes and all that goes with it. But for the rest of us, the dairy, the meat. Now, again, I could sit here and do an entire show with you, Dan, about the dangers of bovine hormones. Absolutely, that exists. The garbage that's in our dirt and fertilizers. I'm with you 100%. But we don't live in a glass house, for Pete's sakes. I mean, where do we draw the line? I don't have 15 acres to grow food and cattle and everything else that goes with it. So we have to live in the real world. Hope that makes sense.
I think as far as, before we move on, Coach, I want to make sure that we wrap up the diet portion properly, because I think it's a vital piece to this weight loss thing. Because if you can't control your diet, you're not going to have the energy to go out and exercise and do the things that you need to do. But as far as your diet, one of the questions is what do I eat and how often do I eat? And you've always said shop the perimeter of the grocery store.
Yep. I think it's just the easiest way to get people to understand nutrition, because 99% of the grocery stores are going to have your fresh vegetables, your dairy, your meat department. And so when you put those all together, think about it. What's a complex carbohydrate? Whatever's in the perimeter of the store. What's a simple carbohydrate? Anything that's found in the center of the store. If you just look at that from a general standpoint, it's the easiest litmus test. Eat less from the middle of the store, eat more from the outside of the store. Now, again, I don't live in a glass house. There's times when Michaela and I'll be flying, and yes, I'll eat an energy bar that comes out of a wrapper. Well, that's because we've got a 9-hour flight to the UK. You got to choose your battles.
Yeah.
But the idea here is, like you said, Dan, what should people eat? Keep it simple: a fruit, a vegetable, and a lean protein. And you and I have talked about this off the record when we were getting your program up and running again. I will have people that will say, you need to eat less meat because it's acidic by nature. For people who have maybe done some studying, there's a couple of great books out there about eating based on your blood type. That's A+, 100%. If you've got somebody who has food allergies, sure, you need to go to a good doctor who can help you understand, do you have maybe an imbalance between the bacteria in your gut and the yeast? There's all kinds of little things. That all has credibility. We're just keeping it at 10,000 foot, addressing the majority of the frustrations that exist. Eat every couple hours. Now, there's going to be people that say, nope, you got to do intermittent fasting. Bullshit. Intermittent fasting is hard on the body. Now, again, If you're getting 9.5 to 10 hours of sleep and your relative overall stress in your life is low, go ahead and do intermittent fasting. They had us do it as an athlete. They only let us do it in preseason, and they only let us do it 1 day a week. Again, I'm going to go into, I have a background, I've got degrees in exercise science. I've got degrees in nutrition. I get it. The science of intermittent fasting, putting yourself into a state of ketosis or any other, I call it fad, that's now popular, there is definitely credibility to it, but like everything, Dan, it gets taken out of context. If you go 8 to 10 hours, i.e. sleep, and you get up in the morning and you exercise at a low heart rate, you will leverage more stored body fat. It's a scientific fact. What I'm saying is if you're running on 3.5, 4 hours of sleep and you're calorically restricted and your workouts are high intensity, that completely counter benefits or offsets the benefits associated with each one of those individually. Intermittent fasting, high intensity training, but people put them all in one. And then you get somebody on social media, look at me and my 6-pack abs with their shirts pulled up and their shorts pulled down. Look at these. I got this by doing HIIT training. I'm here to tell you, and I'm not saying it's across the board, but I've been doing this for 38 years and I've seen a lot of people come across our front door. A lot of those things you see on social media, and Dan, this always amazes me. I'm 56 years old. Okay. What amazes me is how many people my age are shooting up on HGH, human growth hormone, and testosterone. So yeah, on social media, they look great, not to mention Photoshop, which I'm amazed people take the time to Photoshop something on social media, but I'm going to leave that alone. But yeah, I'm blown away where people will go on social media and they'll advocate it's this high intensity interval training, intermittent fasting, blah, 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 state of ketosis, blah. And then behind the scenes, they report to us that they've been jacked up on HGH for 11 years and now their system is shut down. They've got other problems because the body's overstressed. As we say in the motor world, you can't just keep throwing BNG, bold new graphics on a bike and think that it's going to gain 8 horsepower. It just doesn't work. And that's because I want to go back to your question about how to eat a fruit and a vegetable and a lean protein. It's going to offset the argument that meat is very acidic by nature. Well, if you eat fruits and vegetables, it offsets the alkalinity. Then you get into pH versus alkalinity. People say, oh, are you eating a low or a high glycemic diet? If you eat fruits and vegetables, you're eating a low glycemic diet. Again, buzzwords, right? What's a low glycemic diet? It just means that your blood sugar levels are staying at a very low neutral level. Your pancreas isn't going to dump a ton of insulin in because you're eating a complex carbohydrate, a low glycemic. You can use those words interchangeably. Dan, your question is very good. What's low glycemic? Fruits and vegetables. If someone wants to argue alkalinity, pH, high or low glycemic, you've got them covered. If they're saying that you want to look at, are you eating the right things to support your immune system, build lean muscle and drop body fat? You have to look at adequate calorie intake, proper hydration. We already talked about that. You should be up 3 to 5 pounds every night. You compare morning to morning. If you're having an inflammatory response, is that exercise or food related? When you look at your food, make sure. Now, Dan, you said something earlier that I think is really important for the listeners. Someday, like if you're following your calorie intake on Garmin, I mean, come on, some days you might overeat by 300-400. Some days you might miss it by 200 or 300. Again, please don't make this a full-time job. Start to get in the parameters. Try to get some boundaries, because once you get into the boundaries, Dan, you know, if you go ride moto and you do 320s, you pretty much know you're going to burn about 1,000 calories. Well, now you know in your cooler, all right, I'm going to take 2 bottles of energy fuel, so that's 600 calories. And then on my way home, I'm going to have a peanut butter and honey sandwich on high quality bread. So by the time you get home, you've already bridged that 1,000 calories. You get home, you feel good. You don't feel like you're wiped out. You can clean your bike, prep it, get it ready for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Get home, be your daughter's dad, be Sabrina's husband, off you go, right? So now you've got yourself into a situation where you're going to be worth something for those around you. And now quality of life goes the other direction. You go back to when you exercise at a low intensity. Now, again, depending on what time of the year is, my athletes will do intervals if it's race season. But if we're in preseason, we don't do any high intensity intervals. We'll do aerobic intervals. Dan, you've been on some programs. We might do a heart rate ladder in zone 2 just to keep it changed up mentally. But the source of the fuel, you want to drop body fat. Let me share this one more time. Do we want to burn? If you come to me and you say, Rob, and if you're listening to this podcast, and you're telling me that you want to drop body fat, keep the intensity low, because you're going to burn a higher percentage of stored fat, a lower percentage of stored sugar. This is what irritates me when you, the listener, go to somebody and you laid out to them what you want to do. I want to get the stress out of my system. I want to drop unwanted body fat. I want to sleep better. I want to get my sex drive back, right? Some very fundamental needs, wants, and desires. And they have you do the other things so that they make you feel like, as I always tease you, Dan, if I make you so sore that you can't brush your teeth, does that make me a better trainer? I just don't get it. I don't get it.
No, but before we go, Coach, and we may have to do a part 2 of this one. We went off the rails a little bit, but this is great stuff, and this is stuff that our listeners, the public, they don't get to hear, right? They're just seeing what is on Instagram and all these ads that come up on Facebook, right? I mean, this is the true real life data that you have and the experience that you bring. So I think this is good, but we may need to do a part 2 to come back to the exercise portion and how we validate all this and whatnot. But before we wrap up the diet thing, going back to your graph and the blood sugar thing, we've seen some guys in the moto world, as recent as a couple weeks ago, Dylan Ferrandis on the podium was drinking a Coke, right? That's to stabilize his blood sugar, right? After coming off of a high intensity, moto, to get his blood sugar back, he drank the Coke. And we've seen guys eat pixie sticks, all kinds of stuff, but essentially they're trying to stabilize their blood sugar, correct?
Actually incorrect. And not to be, and again, I hope people understand, this shows you how our show is not script, because you had no idea I was going to go this route. I would never encourage anybody to drink a Coca-Cola until they're done for the entire day. Remember how we talked about earlier, your pancreas will release insulin? Well, when you drink a Coca-Cola, you're going to get an insulin spike that's going to go through the roof. And unfortunately, about 20 minutes later, you get a severe crash. So doing it in between the motos, I don't know. Do you remember? Because somebody sent me the picture, and I don't know if it was after Moto 1 or Moto 2. Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it was after Moto 1, but I don't quote me on that to be absolutely accurate. But
that's okay. And for those that have followed us for a long period of time, you've heard me say that Coca-Cola is utilized in the Tour de France and other things. And that's where I want to make sure the listeners are like, well, Lance isn't taking, or the Tour de France riders aren't taking it only at the end of the race. And here's why. In the Tour de France, you've got a stage that could last anywhere 3 to 5 hours. In motocross, it's 30 plus 2. So when you see the guys in the Tour de France, they're doing it to reactivate the digestive enzymes so that when they reach into their musket bag, they can actually eat something that's of relatively substance. It'll be a small croissant sandwich. There's a multitude of things that different teams like to have in their bags. So during the Tour de France, they'll do a small can of Coke to reactivate the digestive enzymes in the gut. When we're looking at the end of the day for somebody who rides moto or does a triathlon or a road race or whatever, you utilize the Coca-Cola to do the same thing, because stress, high heat, and high heart rate will all suppress appetite. So at the precise time that your body needs recovery calories, the idea of eating is nauseating. And that's where you introduce Coke very slowly. It kind of spurns the body up to want. Give it about 30, 45 minutes and you'll have the desire to eat a square meal, where otherwise, if you still feel kind of sick to your stomach, you try to choke down a meal to try to get the recovery calories, there's a good chance you're either going to see it come up on your dashboard or in your shorts. So that's what we have to be careful of.
Well, we learn something every day, and not everything you see on TV is what it appears.
That's exactly right. Yep, exactly. But no, it's a great question, and I hope our moto heads benefit from that.
Coach Robb, it's been real today. Thank you so much for the time. Listeners, viewers, thank you guys so much for sticking with us. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. We'll be back to do a part 2 on this one. We still have a lot to talk about in guaranteed weight loss for health and performance. So look for a part 2 on this one. Coach Robb, have a great weekend. Listeners, have a great weekend, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.